Hey, what's up, everybody? Eddie Barco here, and we'll get into the interview with Fairlane in just a second. But I wanted to let you know that we're actually previewing his brand new song that's coming out this week, right at the end of the interview. So make sure to stick around after the interview is over. But for now, let's go ahead and dive right into the conversation.
The day in the life of a podcaster.
Dude, I mean, I would much rather do this in person, but you know how it is. These days, we can't really do much. But overall, how are you, man? Everything good?
Pretty good. Yeah, I'm back in Canada after 4 months abroad. I was in Germany just recently visiting my girlfriend again, and so came back and had to undergo all the COVID testing and the quarantining and everything. And so it was one of those things again where it seems like I've done it a few times in the last year because she's in Germany studying right now, and so I'll go out there with the plan of staying for like 3 to 4 weeks, and then I'll end up canceling that return flight, and I'll stay for as long as I possibly can. And so this most recent time I came back, I think it was like just under the 30 or the 90-day mark. Because on a tourist visa, you get 90 days before you gotta get the fuck out of there. And so,
yeah, do they come looking for you? I've always wanted to know that. Like, do they just look for you when you don't show up, when you don't leave?
they could. It's more of a hassle when you're leaving the airport. So when you clear customs leaving the European Union, they'll ask you like, okay, how long was your stay? And so you could, if you really wanted to play it rough, you could try and lie, but they're going to check your passport. And if they see that stamp, they're going to hit you with a fine. And then you run the risk of getting deported. And then once you get deported, you have a hard time getting back in. So
yeah.
I'm like,
well, I was already leaving though. I was already leaving. And then they just like, kick you out.
I forgot to set my alarm, bro. It's like, I'm trying to get out of here. No. So I stayed for 90 days and then I came back, and then I was at my parents' place in Calgary for a month, just because I don't get to see my family much. And so
it's Calgary. That's up in Alberta, right? Is that how you pronounce that?
Alberta. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was fucking cold, man. I got there and it was hovering. I mean, I'll try and do conversions. I don't know them too well. We do everything in Celsius, but it was like, I don't know. I want to say like the modest like 60s, maybe 70s. And then right as I left, it dropped. It was like minus, I think 35 Fahrenheit or something like that.
Dude, holy shit.
With the wind chill. Yeah. And so we came back here, and then we're getting hit with a bit of a polar vortex in BC. I'm in Vancouver now. And so we just got dumped on the other day, like a foot of snow, and people aren't prepared for it. So like cars are sliding out and buses aren't running. And it's just like, it's hilarious to see. But
is that pretty common though? I mean, I'm not from the snow. I'm from here, but I've been to the snow many times. But it's not the same when you visit versus when you live. Like, is it very common when there's just tons of snow and everything just shuts down? There's nobody allowed on the road, or I mean, I don't know.
A lot of cities, like, I mean, I was born in Winnipeg, which is like central Canada. Like, it's literally joked as, it's called Winterpeg, Manitoba. Like, they make a joke about it because like I remember growing up and there were snow days where you'd wake up to like 4 or 5 feet of snow and you couldn't open your front door. And they would just be like, damn, you can't go to school. Like, we're literally bulldozing the roads. Like, and I remember as a little kid, we'd climb up onto the roof. So there'd be these massive snowbanks, and we would jump off the roof into the snowbanks with my dad. And and so that was growing up. But like, obviously out there, you're prepared for it, right? Like, everyone's got like winter tires with like chains in the trunk if they absolutely need them to get around. Whereas out here, it's like you're expecting maybe 2 or 3 snowfalls a year, if that. So nobody prepares for it. So they're like, oh, I got all seasons, or I got these like bare ass summer tires. We'll see what happens. And then they try to go up a slope of like a 5% gradient pitch, and they're sliding backwards, wondering what's going on. Like, yeah, you need winter tires. Like, we have the technology for this. Like, you're just not prepared for it because it never snows here. So like in cities like this, I mean, it's the same thing. I see what's going on in Texas right now. Like, they're getting hit with this giant.
I haven't heard. Wait, they're getting hit with like a huge blizzard or something in Texas?
Yeah, it's like freezing down there, and they're all getting hit with snow. And like a lot of the cities like Dallas and Austin, I think, lost power for like 4 or 5 hours the other day.
Damn.
Like the restaurants are closed. I mean, they're already closed, but like closed even further because staff can't get to work to like prepare food because they can't drive there, and like buses aren't running. It's crazy, bro. So like,
holy shit, man. Damn.
This is the winter. This is the winter where everyone becomes acclimated to what I had to deal with as a child my entire life. And now it's your turn.
See, that makes sense. I've been seeing so many memes all over the internet of like, the US primarily, and like North America, and like half of the from the east side, from like the halfway point to the east side, it's all covered in snow. And I just thought, well, it's wintertime. I thought that was normal, but I guess no. I guess tons of people are experiencing this huge winter. I had no idea. No fucking clue. Holy shit.
Because you're in California, correct?
Yeah, I'm in LA.
The day LA gets snow is the day that the world is officially over.
Yeah, the minute actually, when I was a kid, a long time ago. I want to say middle school. This is, I don't know if it was El Nino or whenever like that storm. You know how there's like these climate shifts that happen every 10 years or so. There's different versions of them, but we usually get El Nino around here. It was that season, and it hailed in LA. Like there was huge amounts of hail that fell for like a day or two, and because it's so warm here, it melted almost instantly. But
Yeah.
it was that bizarre moment where people were like, "What the fuck?" Like, there's hail on the ground. There's never snow. There's never any of that. But there was that one time when there was hail, and I remember that. I was like 12, 13, maybe when that
I'd say
happened.
it had to have been pre-Instagram, otherwise we all
Oh,
would have known
yeah.
about it.
Way before that.
There's
There's way before, exactly. And so I do remember it was fun. Like there was a whole bunch of kids who didn't go to school. Obviously, my parents put me in school that day, but there was like on the news, people just decided not to go to work, not to go to school because it's such a rarity. Well, no, not even, I honestly wouldn't say it was dangerous. They were just like, wow, there's hail on the ground. Let's throw hail balls at each other because
True.
it's so rare for that in LA. So there was this bunch of shit, but crazy. I had no fucking clue. No clue, dude. Oh man. Well, I love that we get to a chance to start by just talking about the weather because it's winter time.
Yeah.
We have to. I do appreciate your time, Ben. By the way, normally I kind of do this. We normally talk before we do the interview, but I don't know. I kind of just want to go into it. If that's cool with you, we can just talk and see where it goes. Is that okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sick, man. Well, I mean, for anyone joining in at this moment, we were talking about snow and the weather, and my man here, Tyler, being from Canada, and I mean, that's where you're from, right? Canada.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Is that where you're still currently based, or do you kind of travel back and forth between the States, Canada, and other countries? I know you were mentioning Germany, but yeah, I don't know.
I was doing a lot of travel back in the day, down to Los Angeles. Actually, that's where I got a lot of like my early start in the production side of things.
Mm.
Was just again like coming down just like on a tourist visa, and it was like the classic, going just like hanging out with friends and experiencing LA, going down to Venice Beach and seeing all the shit on the sidewalk and stuff.
Why the quotations? It's such
Because I feel like it's just like it's like such a typical like, oh, you're going to Los Angeles, you got to go to Venice Beach. And I'm like, I learned over the years like there's so many cooler things that you can discover in LA that just aren't talked about as frequently. But
mad
it's like,
respect. Yes, you're right.
and that's what it was like, you got to get down to Venice Beach. And I remember going there and being like getting hustled by the guys on the sidewalk being like, yo, buy my mixtape, and then all of a sudden there's like this homeless guy screaming at you, and then there's kids skateboarding, like knocking each other over, there's a guy fighting in the corner. And I was just like, I mean, it was entertaining, don't get me wrong, like it was from an observational standpoint, I was like, wow, there's a lot going on here. But like, I think I was going there with a different expectation. Like I'm used to seeing like what's in the movies, like, oh, Venice Beach is like this iconic beach in Los Angeles where it's like everyone's just having a good time playing volleyball and the sun's shining and it's clean. And I was just like, nah.
Some of it is kind of true, but not all of it.
Yes, it's a different form of magic. Let's just put it that way.
That's yeah, you put that right. And it's so true because I feel like everybody that comes, yeah, I'm from here. I'm from LA, born and raised. And all my friends and people that I've met internationally who come to LA, people either love it or they hate it. They either come here with huge expectations, like you said, because of the movies, it's glamorized in a specific way. And then when they come here and they realize that like downtown's dirty, Hollywood is very dirty. The beaches, for the most part, at least the ones that are popular, are very dirty. There's this initial like, oh, LA wasn't what I thought it would be. And I try my best, like you were saying, to tell people that LA really is this gigantic place with so many secret spots. If you just put some effort into not going to the main touristy spots, you can find a plethora of just many, many really cool things that the city has to offer. But yeah, I can't. Venice Beach, to me, I mean, you have to see it. You have to see it. This is your first time here, but it's definitely a shock. Did you see all the? They usually have all these like dancing groups. Were they there at the time when you were there?
I haven't actually seen one of those live yet. No, I've only ever been able to see.
Those are cool. Usually, like those dancing crews are pretty good. There's usually like some magicians, but yeah, there's usually like a whole bunch of random ass people. But I'm wondering when you came to LA and you saw the touristy spots. Did you stay here long after that? Did you decide to like make maybe this your home for a little bit, or was it just more of like a travel? I just was here for a week, and then you decide, I'm over it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's tricky as a Canadian, especially too, like, because I mean, similar to like coming and going from Germany, like we have, sort of like an immigration treaty where we can come down on what's called like a B2 visa, which is just a tourist visa, which allows me up to 90 days in the country. with no visa paperwork required. And then after that, you have to go back. It resets, I believe, another 90 days later, and then you can come back for a second 90-day period. So you get 180 days out of the year that you can come and spend in the US without visas and paperwork.
Every year?
Um, every year. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Not resets. So that's super convenient for someone like me, especially when I was just getting started. It's like, I'm not coming down working technically. It's like, it's the classic. I'm going down there to network, meet people, try and get my foot in the door and like see who I can, be introduced to during that trip. So a lot of the time I'd come down like with no real plan. I've always been sort of lucky to be in a freelance position. I think the last time I worked, quote unquote, a full-time job, I was doing remote radio work for a record label called Monster Cat, which is based out of Vancouver here as well.
Nice.
So I was mixing and producing the radio show for them, which I could do remotely. So I had the luxury of saying, okay, well, I'm going to pack up my shit and I'm going to go down to California for 90 days. We'll see what happens. And I would tell them out of the board, I'd say, like, I'm just coming in to just kind of like visit friends and hang out and see what happens. And they were sort of like, okay, well, what do you do for work? I said, well, I work in radio. And it did come up a few times. They said like, oh, okay, so you're a musician. Are you going down to the States to work? And I remember telling the guy, I'm like, well, no, it's like, I'm a remote, freelance podcast guy, essentially, like very similar to what you do. Like I was making podcast radio shows. I was like, I can do that from wherever I am. And if you had the luxury of spending either 3 months in California during the winter or 3 months in Vancouver in the snow, like you'd probably do the same thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I respect that. And so I never really got hassled too much coming down. And so there were a few times where I did that. I'd book a one-way ticket and I would just see, maybe I'd stay for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, and then at the longest, for 3 months. And so that's where, as I said, like I was able to kind of break out of that touristy approach to Los Angeles and started to experience it more as like a local day to day. I started getting frustrated with the traffic. I started getting frustrated with the heat. It was something I never thought I would do. I'd wake up and be like, oh my God, it
can get hot, man.
Hot outside. And I never thought I'd be the person to be complaining about the heat. And I found myself after 2 months of being there and acclimating to that climate, I was like, man, it's too hot to do anything. I want to just like sit inside in front of the air conditioning.
Where were you staying? Were you in the valley at all? Or were you in the main city?
I was closer to Culver.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I was staying with there's a YouTube channel, it's called Trap Nation. And they started a label called Lowly, which is actually where I signed all my music. That's where I got started as a musician doing my solo project. And they as a label and a company had a house down in Culver City, and that's where I was able to stay for a lot of my visits down there, which was incredibly convenient because not only did I have a dope place to stay with, the convenience of, walking distance grocery stores and everything you could need, but also was not paying rent or anything while I was in, right? So it's like that. I mean, I consider myself incredibly blessed that I was able to go about it that way. But yeah.
Yeah, you seem very grateful, which I love that because right off the back, your vibe is very very chill. You seem incredibly happy, very grateful. You have a lot on you've done a lot. And I want to explore as much of it as I possibly can. It's funny because you mentioned the whole traffic thing, and I know that many people that come here after, whether they're visiting LA or whether they're moving here or whatever, one of their first comments to me, at least, because I'm a huge movie guy, like I love watching movies. They talk about movies that are centered around LA, and they're like, wow, it just reminds me of those moments in the movie where there's like a chase scene or like the cars are trying to get away. And I just realized that wouldn't happen, huh? I'm like, no, like the classic one is probably, I think, Italian Job, where like, the Mini Coopers are like racing all over LA. And it's just like, yeah, that's like in the middle of the day. There's no fucking way they would get more than a mile.
No, they'd be chasing each other on the rooftops of cars. They'd be like running. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's one of the things that people will like notice right off the back. But kind of backtracking a little bit because there's so much of your story that I want to unpack, and I've learned a lot about you over the past couple of days, and you just seem to be a very talented individual, and I want to do my best to explore your career. One thing that I want to try and explore a little bit is you mentioned that you're from Canada, and I've had the pleasure of talking to many people from Canada, and you guys seem like the country in general, obviously I'm generalizing here. I'm not Canadian. I don't know enough. So correct me. If I'm ever wrong, just be like, hey, dude, you're wrong about that. Stop it.
Stop that right now.
I know. But one thing that I'm always fascinated by, and I want to know your perspective, because Canada seems to be like its own little, not little, but it seems to be its own entertainment hub. There's a lot of stuff going on out there, whether in the film industry, in the music industry. There's a lot going on. But yet, I still get the feeling from someone like you and other musicians that I've talked to, and even people from other industries like actors and stuff, who they still kind of grow up with this mentality of like, I gotta go to the States, I gotta go work in the States, I gotta go put my foot in the door. So I guess I'm kind of curious, why is that a thing, at least from a Canadian's perspective? Because again, my understanding from what I've learned is you guys do have a pretty huge industry up there, and there's a lot going on. The government seems to support you guys in your artistic endeavors. Why is there this sort of like, I gotta go to the States, whether it's LA, New York, or whatever, to put my foot in the door? Why is that a thing?
I'm actually really glad you brought that up because that's something that I've been really kind of rediscovering for myself, especially as of late. Um, there's a few different ways to go about it, and I think that I know from my personal experience, there is a little bit of a rat race dilemma that's taking place, I think, in some of the local scenes in Canadian
Mm,
cities. And I don't want to generalize and say this is happening everywhere. This has just been from my own experience. Um, I kind of slowly started to make my way further and further west over the years.
mm.
As I was growing up, I went and did university, University of Victoria, which is on the island, just west of Vancouver. It's like as far west as you can go in Canada. And then eventually,
Nice.
once I graduated there, I came back and moved to Vancouver. And I did that because, I was just recently starting to get into, DJing, electronic music, the whole scene. And I was told by somebody that Vancouver has like a really it's got like a thriving music community and like there's a lot of activity there.
Yeah,
And a good friend of mine
I've
was
heard that. Yeah.
yeah, he was a resident DJ at one of the local clubs here. It's called Celebrities Nightclub. It's owned by a group called Blueprint. Blueprint is kind of like controlling Western Canada as far as the live entertainment scene goes. And they've got the money, they got the venues, they've got the backing, relationships, everything. And as soon as I got to Vancouver, I started to notice that everybody wanted to get in with this crew. Like it was very exclusive. There was kind of this like idea that like when you were accepted by Blueprint, when you were accepted by these um, promoters and producers in that community, you were in. Like you were in that
Mm,
clique. Um,
interesting.
and there's no fault in that. I think that every city has that sort of scene, but I noticed for myself that I was pretending to be something that I wasn't a lot more than I wanted to be in order to appease to this crowd. And that is when my shift and my focus actually went more international in that because I was starting to make relationships with people down in California, down in Los Angeles that were, telling me stories of producers they were meeting and writers they were meeting. And there seemed to be this idea of like a buzz, like an activity, like something that was so much bigger than what I was trying to achieve here.
Yeah.
And it's not to sound condescending at all. Like there's obviously a lot that can happen here. It was just like my focus was just shifted away from that. And so the first opportunity I got to come down to California for one of these like, meet your, marketing or sorry,
Yeah.
networking opportunities was actually a friend of mine from Vancouver got booked to play Coachella.
Oh, nice. Who was it?
His name is Vanek.
Nice.
So he's a good friend. His name's Jesse, artist named Vanek. And he got booked to play Coachella, I believe, in 2013 or 14. And he was, just like a kid that was like, oh my God, I'm playing this fucking huge festival. Do you guys want to come? And so we all went down there. And that was when I started to meet a few of these, Los Angeles producers, managers, network promoters, that sort of thing. And that was sort of what got my foot in the door. And that's what started me on this like American based path. Like I was like, okay, I gotta like
Yeah.
make it in America now. I gotta make, because it just seemed like there was so much more happening there. And it kind of just naturally gravitated that way. And then I found that when I came back to Vancouver, the attention that I was always fighting for was almost happening organically. Now, that's where I think having established something for myself, I've been able to reopen my eyes to the resources that are available to Canadians because it's not that Canada is limited, but it is a smaller market. Like you have to consider that the entire population of Canada fits inside the state of California alone, right?
Wow.
Like
Really?
there's only, like California itself has what, 50, 60 million people.
Something like that. Yeah. Like 55, I think.
That's
Yeah.
the entire population of Canada. So that
Damn.
really puts it into perspective, like the market cap that Canada has to offer to this entire industry. And, obviously only a portion of that population is actually supporting a niche of say like electronic pop music, where down in America, you have these massive markets that are available that, generate ticket sales, merch sales, streaming revenue, whatever it is. And so that's where there is this tendency to focus on America just because there's a lot more money, there's a lot more people. It's just like a bigger picture. However, there is a very strong music scene in Canada that I do think gets undermined, myself being guilty of that personally. Because there are, like, I mean, the amount of government funding that's available to Canadian artists is ridiculous. And the
Yeah.
fact that, I actually just recently had a conversation with my label contact and I was like, hey, like, we haven't utilized any of this up until now when I want to start this conversation where it's like I've been releasing music for 2-3 years and not once have we tried to pitch directly to Spotify Canada curators or to, grant groups such as like Factor who are handing out, literally $80,000 starter grants to up and coming producers just to fund their project. And this is like tax
Damn.
free money in your pocket. They're just like, go make a music video, go pay a producer, go pay
That's
special
awesome,
vocal,
man.
and it's crazy. And so, if there are any up and coming Canadian producers listening to this, take advantage of this shit because it's literally there and they want to help you. And not a lot of other countries are generous enough to do this for their creative citizens. So like this, it's something that I've really been trying to bring focus back to now. Is like, okay, I've made some noise down in the States. I'm going to keep focusing there, but like we do have a market here in Canada of people that want to support you, including the government, including the people in the cities. Um, we've got great funding for radio campaigning as well in Canada,
Nice.
where you're not fighting against the giant um, record labels down in the States because you look at what's circulating on radio down and FM radio in particular down in the US, and you look at what's happening in Canada. We have it's actually a law that requires every radio service to spin, I think it's like 30% Canadian generated content every single
Oh,
day.
that's awesome, man.
Right. So they're really trying to bring that focus back to Canadian acts and Canadian artists. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of,
No, sorry, continue.
I was just gonna say that's where my focus is now starting to come back is like, okay, like how do I utilize this? Like, how do I really take advantage of this? Because there's some fantastic plays that can be made, I think.
Yeah, that's very smart, man. And it is interesting because I do feel that, well, as I've come to understand and learn more about music and musicians in general, like I do see that there is this huge influence in American culture specifically. I mean, from around the world, obviously we can argue that, but there is this huge presence of Canadian artists in the US. And it's almost normal. Like when you hear, oh yeah, this famous actor or this famous musician, where are they from? Oh, Canada. People are like, oh, okay. It's like a very normal thing. People don't really research it further than that. It's just like, okay, yeah, we understand. People from Canada come here to perform. One thing I'm curious about is it? I imagine not because I feel like it's common, but I'm just wondering what you say about it. Is it looked down upon amongst other maybe diehard Canadian musicians in that music scene to come to the US and maybe not even the US, maybe other countries for that initial opportunity when there is so much in Canada? And obviously I feel like as a young artist, you figure out you're figuring it out as you go, right? And then maybe as you get older you realize, oh wow, there's all this support in my home country for me to do my art. But I'm wondering, in your experience, did you feel like there was this sort of unspoken judgment from other artists to not come, to maybe just stay in Canada and make it there and then maybe come later? I don't know. I don't even know what I'm asking. I'm curious because I know that in other environments, I don't want to say which ones are specific, but I do know that there's sometimes do exist this sort of pride to try and make it where you're from and to not take that success away from where you're from, which I totally respect. But I'm just wondering, in your opinion, did you experience that? Is that even a thing at all?
I I don't want to say no for sure because it could be a thing. I personally just have not experienced it. I think that there is like a universal understanding that again, like the whole reason you want to get down into the American market is because of the availability of big business. Essentially, it's like
Yeah.
that's where the major labels are located. That's where the money is, and that's where you're going to get the funding to take your project to the next level. And that's not saying that Canada doesn't have the resources, but I do think that there might be a very small particular group of individuals that might look down upon that and say like, well, no, you should be bringing the attention back to Canada. Like artists like Drake actually has done a really good job of that in coming down to
Yeah.
the US, making it down in the US and then coming back and really trying to like sport that Toronto OVO pride is like, no, we're Canadians. Like, look what we're doing. We're the East Coast, like we're kicking ass. And that I think is probably one of the better ways to do it. And that's sort of on a much smaller scale, sort of what I'm almost trying to apply to myself is just like, no, like I'm going out, I'm doing what I can to help grow my business. And then I want to come back and I want to bring that attention back to Canada and, wear it with pride that, yeah, like I'm a Canadian artist. Like, I'm doing what I have to do. I'm working where I have to work, but like at the end of the day, I am still Canadian and I do want to support my country. Um, but yeah, there is just kind of like that universal understanding that like there will eventually be a cap that Canada has to offer. And I think that actually one of the big examples was I was having a conversation with a friend down in Los Angeles actually about bands that, I grew up listening to on the radio, not realizing that they were CanCon, that's what we call it, the Canadian content CanCon artists that were
Mm.
pumped and shilled by the Canadian government on Canadian radio. And a good example of that, I believe, was a band called Billy Talent. And Billy Talent was huge across Canada. Like everybody in, early high school, junior high was listening to Billy Talent. Like they were like the mainstream kind of like punk, edgy thing that, was getting blown up. And I was convinced that Billy Talent was an international sensation. And when
Mm.
I told my friend that I used to listen to Billy Talent growing up, he didn't have a fucking clue who they were.
They're like,
And
who?
he's like, I've never heard of Billy Talent before. And I was like, what are you talking about? They were all over the radio. He's like, Billy Talent was never on the radio. And I realized, oh my God, they were a Canadian artist. Like they probably toured the shit out of Canada, but we're probably trying to make that break into American mainstream culture.
Interesting.
And that was what like really clicked for me is I was like, that's what that's what Canada essentially is doing is like they have the ability to build a sustainable career for yourself. Don't get me wrong. But like there is that limitation where it's like people elsewhere weren't hearing about them the way that we were here in our home country. And so that's where I say there's like this kind of like cap where like you can almost get a little bit too stuck in it. I think if you go down that lane of focusing entirely on being like a Canadian content artist and riding the wave of having all that government support, that's fantastic. But you do run the risk of maybe getting stuck in that category a little bit. So
Mm.
that would be my only kind of like 2 cents on that. But
Yeah, that is a very interesting story, and I do feel like that happens quite a bit. I'm not an expert in this field at all, so I'm just merely speculating. But I do know that you go to other countries. Fred Armisen, do you know who Fred Armisen is? The SNL. He was on SNL. He was on Portlandia. Famous
okay.
actor. He's also a drummer. If you saw a picture of him, you know who he is. But
Yeah.
in his stand up. There's this moment where he talks about all his travels and how he travels a lot for his comedic act, and he mentions how sometimes when he goes to international countries, he'll stay at random hotels, in between shows, and he'll just turn on the TV and he'll serve the channels, and then every now and then he'll come across like a live taping of a live like music event, and in his routine he just jokes how like they're speaking in foreign languages, and in the concert they're like, all right, here's so and so, and the camera will just pan to like stadiums full of people just like cheering their asses off for this dude singing in a random language that he does not understand, and in his mind he's just like, who the fuck is this dude? Like I've never heard of this person before, and they're like huge in their respective countries, but he's not ever heard of them. But what I'm kind of getting at is, since I'm Hispanic, right? I'm Guatemalan, and in Latin America, this isn't the same across the board, but I would argue that in Latin America, which is huge, Central America, Mexico, all the way to South America, a lot of artists have the ability to be able to sort of travel between borders because they all speak Spanish for the most part, and a lot of the genres sort of mix. And so they do have this ability to be able to, in my opinion, even be bigger than some American artists, because there's just so many Hispanic countries, right? But I've always wondered why the U.S., and I'm not sure if you agree with this, but I'm just wondering, maybe from your perspective, why America in that sense has become this sort of central entertainment hub. Because as I get older, I'm learning more and more and more about bigger, maybe not bigger, but entertainment hubs are just as big all over the world. Europe being one of them, South America being one of them, and I just wonder why, as musicians, especially this day and age, we consider America like the center point of music culture, especially when there's bigger countries. China is on the up and up. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. This might be a conversation for another time, but I'm just wondering what like you think about that.
No, I totally agree. I think that the only thing I could maybe speculate is there's some sort of sex appeal that comes with the North American culture. And I don't know what it is or why it is, because I've had that, that thought myself. It's like North America represents what we'll say, including Mexico, like 500 million people, maybe in the entire, there's 7 billion people in the world.
Yeah.
Where are the 6.5 billion people listening to, representing their culture, their language, their idols, their fans? Like you look at India, you look at China, you look at like all these massive, like you said, they have their own superstars, but it just seems like everyone wants to get to the US for one reason or another. But I think that the easiest way to boil it down to is there's some sort of sex appeal or overall, yeah, it just draws people there. So I do in recent time, like, on top of coming back and really focusing on, yeah, what can I do in my own home country? There is this new model of like, what can we do elsewhere in the world? And I do think that that might be one of the major benefits of uh, the pandemic this year was the cancellation of touring across America, first and foremost, really opened up people's minds to the opportunity of global live streaming, as well as trying to really grow their numbers in global markets on a streaming, from a streaming perspective as well. So
Yeah.
you start looking at like, everyone starts getting their tours canceled. Okay, oh my God, how are we going to make money? Well, there are plenty of ways to make money. You can make money through selling merchandise. You can make money through selling services. You can make money through doing, paid live streams, and you can make money through streaming your music. And when you really start to open up your mind to this idea of like, I don't need to get streams only in America because that's just where I was touring. I can get streams in Asia and India, anywhere in the world. It really opens up the size of the world and the planet and the opportunities that come with expanding your brand into these other markets. Um,
Yeah.
so that's been a big thing that we've done, in the last little while is really trying to focus on like, okay, like how are we going to market, even the Fairlane project to a demographic like China and a market like China that has massive, massive touring potential. Or, you even look at like Japan or India or like, coming down to Mexico and playing shows in Mexico. Like there's a
Yeah.
huge market for dance music in Mexico, but it's always being kind of treated as this like smaller market. But you look at it and it's like it's fucking huge, especially in the context of America. Like the numbers are they severely outweigh the population of America. But I do think that it does come back to America being the place that's willing to pay to play. Like they have the money, they have the big business that's able to back these opportunities. But especially now, when people are opening up their minds to these other markets, like it's really showing the potential of growing on a global scale.
Yeah.
So that's something that we're trying to focus on a little bit more moving forward.
Just as a little tidbit, everybody, right now we got cut off for like 2-3 minutes. Zoom wasn't letting me back in, but Tyler did an excellent job of keeping the topic going. So thank you for thank you for doing that, Tyler. I really appreciate it.
No
But
problem.
you're right. I mean, the world is huge. The world is gigantic, and as I grow, I learn more and more about it. And I'm happy that you are thinking about those things because I do feel like your music, when I listen to what Fairlane is about, and I listen to some of the stuff that you're doing, it is electronic and you are in the dance genre, but I do feel like you're also kind of touching on these areas that can be used in many different like in many different genres. Because I do feel that even though I'm and you're welcome, but like in my experience, I come from more of a jazz, pop, rock, singer songwriter background, and I've seen that it can, even though those genres are huge and there's a lot of room for exploration, they can get to a point where you hit these brick walls creatively, and obviously you can argue that for almost anything, but I do feel like there are ways to go about music where it, even though it satisfies and it checks off all the boxes for the genre that it's currently in, there's ways to make music where it can, go to that cusp where someone from a different entire genre can appreciate it and grab it and maybe do something with it and maybe bring you on or things of that sort. And I feel like that's what you're doing with Fairlane when I listen to your music. I guess I'm wondering, early on in your career, as you came from Canada, you came to LA, you were starting with your production, you worked with Monster Cat, all that. What were your influences early on? And I know that's probably a very cliche, basic question, but I also feel like it's an important one to really understand your musical style.
I mean, I've always been so I was a bit of a genre hopper, right? Like growing up especially, like that was kind of my way of fitting in. So I had this group of friends, there was like 5 or 6 of us that went from, junior high through to high school. And every single year it seemed like we had a different musical preference.
Hmm.
And it was like decided unanimously, okay, that's what we're listening to. Okay. Just like stick with it. Doesn't matter. So we went from like we listened to like indie pop to like rock to ska. And then I remember in like my later years of high schools when I really started getting into like more of the like I say like screamo, emo music. I was listening to like Under Oath, Misery Signals, like Census Fail, Norma Jean, all those guys, right?
Nice.
Um, and what I loved about them though was that they had this ability to like balance these like really hard rocky elements, and then they would break down into these like beautiful acoustic ballad sections that were just like instrumentation, and you were like, whoa! And then it would go right back into rock. And there was another band, it was like Enter Shikari, I think it was called. It was like the first band that I heard personally that came in and blended this like rock emo, beautiful and then angry with like synthesis and like synthesized drums and like experimentation on the electronic side. And I was like, whoa, that's really cool. Then that kind of opened up this world to like dance music. And I remember like, I think it was like grade 11 or grade 12. I was browsing through MySpace back when that was the thing. Right? I
Oh
watched
man.
like the peak of MySpace, like back in there, and like I remember seeing this. It was like because I grew up as a snowboarder as well, and I was watching all these hype snowboard edits and stuff, and I found this snowboarder that I wanted to check out, and he had a MySpace. I went to his MySpace, and you could like pick, I think it was like 4 or 5 songs that you had linked on your MySpace page that you could like circle through as a little mini playlist, and
Yeah.
he had a Dead Mouse song. It's like Faxing Berlin, right? And I remember that was like my first time hearing like dance music. Like that was like four on the floor, pure synthesis, like whoa. And it was like,
What year was this? Like 2010 ish or what?
oh, this is like 2006, 2007.
Oh, damn. Even before. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I'm 30 years old. I think a lot of people don't realize that. I'm actually I'd consider myself old to be in the EDM scene.
I'm 32. But I'm 30 as well. You look young though. That's probably why.
Thank you, bro. But yeah, so this is like 2006, 2007, and I discovered Dead Mouse. Then that opened up this world, and I was listening to like there's a group called like Crystal Castles, and then Ratatat came out with like their stuff, and it was like this weird like electronic glitch beat stuff. And and that was sort of like my introduction to the electronic music, and so I've always kind of tried to like find a way to blend those two worlds and like the introduction to those two worlds, because I think that that's what ultimately drove me to being, I consider myself a guitar based producer as well,
Yeah.
using the instrument primarily in a lot of my production, because I found that it was like that was always what I was trying to achieve, was like that balance of like experimental electronic stuff with the beauty of just like the raw instrument itself, and just like leaving these like acoustic electronic instrumental sections and records that can exist on their own, and doing that the way that these old like emo pop punk bands were doing so beautifully. And I think that that's kind of where a lot of my raw influences come from,
Yeah.
in trying to find that like the dichotomy of having like the butterfly in a thunderstorm kind of analogy, and sort of to kind of achieve that in some sort of way. um but yeah, that's kind of like the little background I have on my introduction to
No, dude, I love it. It's crazy because we're the exact same age. When's your birthday, by the way? Like what month?
September 26th.
Oh, what? No way. We're almost exactly a month apart. Mine is October 25th.
There you
So
go.
I'm a Scorpio and I'm a proud Scorpio. Um, well, what's interesting is I have an interestingly, almost similar story where I wasn't a snowboarder growing up, but I was a skateboarder.
Mhm.
So I grew up on all the Tony Hawk games, all like the ska bands of the time. I really loved ska growing up. And I don't know, like to me, it's interesting when you look back at a lot of the things that influence you growing up, because a little interesting piece of my history is, even though I was listening to ska and some of those bands, my access to music at the time was very limited because I grew up very religious, and so my folks didn't allow me to listen to a lot of music. So I could get away with listening to jazz, and I would sneak away to listen to some ska as much as I possibly could from like my friends' CDs or whatever. But it wasn't until college where I really like just dove into tons and tons of music that I missed out in my childhood, and I caught up, in about a year. But what is interesting is all the bands that you mentioned, I can see some of especially a lot of the guitar influences, because one of the things that I feel make you stand out is your whole ability to combine. I don't want to say real instruments, because in my opinion, real instrument can be defined in many different ways. But for the sake of this interview, we'll separate synthesis and electronic music as its own thing, and then
We'll
guitars
call
and
it
drums.
analog for now.
There you go. Much better word, exactly, analog. But you found this way to combine analog elements with electronic music, and you blend them in this very beautiful way. And there are a few people out there that are trying to do that, but it's still, in my opinion, and especially in the electronic scene, it's not a very common thing. And I understand why, because its origins are from computers and synthesis and blah blah blah. But I do find that in order to venture into that new world, that like where you can combine analog with electronic, there is you need to have some sort of courage because it isn't always accepted by everybody. Even though it's cool, it needs to be done. It needs to be well done in order to be accepted. So I guess for you, my question is, did it take you a while to really embrace that side of you, that side that really wanted to combine both analog and electronic? Was it a gradual transition? Did you know right off the back that you wanted to do it? I don't know. Like, I guess I'm wondering, how was it that you created this style for yourself? Because it is unique and I love it. And I'm wondering if it took you some bravery. Did somebody encourage you? I don't know. Like, how did that happen? How did it become?
I hate to say it, but I almost think that it came from a bit of laziness. And that's it's kind of ironic to say that, but it's like, but you look at like, like I don't necessarily pride myself on sound design. I can
Mm.
sit there and I can grind and I can try and come up with it, but there are people out there that are a billion times better than me at sound design. But
There's
what I
some
do
geniuses
know,
out there, man.
they're
Geniuses.
insane and they're all kids. They're all
Yeah.
15, 16 years old. And I'm listening to these records and I'm like, it's blowing my face off. And I'm just like, what the hell? And they're like in their room on headphones. I'm over here working on this a day and night. And I'm like, oh my God, like these kids are coming for my job. Right. But, it's inspiring as shit though, to see these kids because they're pushing the boundaries and it's
Yeah.
amazing to witness that. But it came from a sense of almost laziness where I would look over and I'd say like, I could sit here and I could spend hours trying to like find the perfect bass sound, or I could just record a bass guitar and run it through some cool distortion because I
Mm.
know that I can with my hands and just like my sense of rhythm, I can create. It's like beatboxing, right? It's like I can
Yeah.
sit there and program drums where I could go and I can know inherently what my body wants to do and how I want to groove to this record. And so I found that that was sort of like the simplest way to approach the composition of a record was just to pick up the instrument as much as possible. And then it meant that I had to do less sound design. And so that's actually kind of how I got into that because, it wasn't until like the last 3 years, like I've been producing, I'd say for probably about 6 or 7 years now.
Nice.
I've only been releasing music as Fairlane for 3 of those years. Before that, I was doing a lot of ghost production, was trying to get into like just this world of production and doing it as a professional career, which meant dealing with a lot of bullshit, but also giving myself the chance to really grow and kind of like learn to somewhat master my craft. And I found that it was just more so when I started working on my own records and they were a little bit more precious to me and I started to care a little bit more about the outcome that I was, diving into this like, well, I feel like I could almost do it better on the guitar and it's easier. And so that's what really kind of pushed me to gravitate towards that. And I noticed that, especially coming from just a compositional standpoint, if you can get a record to sound good with just a vocal and a guitar, well, then the rest is easy. Like that's the
Mm.
fundamental of music. And like you think like that's how music used to exist was just like a voice and an instrument. And that's the reason we have piano ballads, the reason we have, full orchestrated songs. But it's like at the end of the day, like instruments are meant to collaborate with each other and they're meant to sound good just on their own. And adding synthesis and adding all this extra production just takes it kind of a step above that. And so I
Yeah.
found that it really simplified that approach to me is like, okay, does this record, is there a groove? Is there a melody? Is there a mood? And is there a story with just these two elements? And once you can achieve that, now I know, okay, I have a record and I can move forward with it. And so I found that, yeah, it was kind of birthed out of, as I said, like a form of laziness, but I feel that it's really simplified and helped, I guess you could say, like strengthen my approach to composing a full record. Um,
Yeah.
so that's sort of been my approach.
I'm wondering. There's two questions I want to ask you. So before I forget, the first one, you did mention how you were trying to do the whole ghost production thing, which I know is a very big deal in LA. I would argue LA probably has some of the most talented ghost producers and ghost writers too, compared to the whole entire nation. There's so many of them spread out in the U.S., but there's a huge concentration here in LA specifically. In your opinion, what was some of that bullshit that sort of turned you away from that? Like, I'm glad that you are pursuing your own music and you have, I mean, it's your project and it's working clearly, so good job for you. But I'm wondering, you did try it for a little bit. What was it about it that you felt like it was bullshit, that it wasn't your thing? I'm just curious.
I was too green and I was too eager.
Too
And
green. Mm.
too green, like just too new to the whole scene. Like it's with any business, you need to learn to navigate the nature of that business environment, right? So there's going to be a particular way to play the game. And I was, as I said, I was a very green producer. I was new to all of this. I didn't know what things to look for in what was considered a good deal and what was considered a bad deal, and when somebody was maybe taking advantage of me and when somebody genuinely wanted both of us to win, whether it be through compensation or splits on the master, whatever it was. Because at the end of the day, it's a client relationship. You're like, okay, I'm producing a record for you and you're going to compensate me with what I deem is fair, not knowing that there were better deals out there. And so, perfect example, I won't name names because you sign NDAs, and so I'm going to respect
Right.
that.
Right.
But it's like I had a client approach me for a record that needed production, and I remember producing it, sending it back to them. They were thrilled. Oh my god, we're going to sign it with this label. Everything is looking good. The whole team is excited about it, and they paid me $1,000. Okay,
Wow.
and I was so happy because I'm 24 years old. I'm just out of university. I'm making money for the first time off of music. I'm like, I made this on my laptop. Oh my god, I'm getting paid, right?
Yeah.
I take, and it's US dollars too, which is like 1,300 Canadian. So I'm like,
Nice.
all right, there it is. So I'm cashing in and I'm feeling good about this. That record went on to do 40 million streams, right? And
Oh man.
I didn't I didn't know about any of this because I'm just like, I got paid. And I remember telling somebody, I'm like, yeah, I remember I got paid $1,000 for that record. And they're like, that song's made over 100 grand, including licensing, publishing, royalties. Like, what the hell, dude? Like, if you'd taken 10% of that record, you would have made 10 times what you got paid up front. But I didn't know this. I was
Yeah.
so unaware of all this. And the client fully knew this. They knew the potential of this record. They knew who was signing it, the team that was behind it. And that's what I'm saying is like, there's this tendency where people, if they can take advantage of somebody, they're going to do that. And I'm not saying everybody is that way, but there are people that do operate that way. And I just
Yeah.
started to notice that I was like, I was just a kid who had no idea what was going on, who was just trying to make some money and trying to get my foot in the door. And people recognized that. And they said, like, okay, well, here's somebody that can, produce something that we want that has no idea what the fuck's going on. We can probably get them to sign a pretty shit deal and get away with this. And it happened a few times before I was able to learn and catch up with it. Looking back 6 years later, I'm like, oh my God, you were an idiot. We're recovered from that. We're moving forward. But it just kind of like hit a point where I was like, I feel like there's too much opportunity for people to take advantage of one another in this industry. And it just kind of burnt me out a little bit.
Yeah.
But the benefit of it, and I've told a lot of people, was that in those years of doing that, I was able to develop the skills, develop the knowledge that I then carried forward into my artist project, which was priceless. Like that
Mm.
experience, and that knowledge that I gained from doing that was priceless. And that's why I don't have any regrets. I could certainly go back and say, oh, I wish I'd signed a better deal on this record or that record. That's behind me. I can move forward. But it's like I learned from those experiences, and I learned, I crafted my skill. I got better at producing. I got faster at producing. And then when I did come into the time where I wanted to start my artist project, I had the skills that I needed to do that.
Yeah. I'm wondering, obviously this is just speculation, but do you feel like had you known better at the time and had you been more aggressive about you getting what you deserve, what you rightfully deserved at the time, do you feel like you would have been given those opportunities, or do you think they would have just moved on to somebody else who would have taken less? Because the reason I bring this up is this is a topic I've talked with some other people too, and I've recognized that amongst young musicians and young creatives in general, not just musicians, this is a topic that comes up a lot because there is this sort of thought that you kind of got to sacrifice or, quote unquote, pay your dues in order to actually, quote unquote, make it. And so I do find that there is this sort of common thought process, I guess you can say, amongst up and coming young hungry musicians of like, hey, I'll just take what I can get. I know I can get more, but hey, if it's not me, they're gonna give it to somebody else. And so I'm just gonna take this and be happy with the experience. So obviously it worked out for you. And looking back at your career, you're where you need to be. But have you ever just put thought into it like, what if you did fight for like, that 10% or for higher pay? Would they have just been like, you know what, never mind? I don't know.
I'd say on a macro scale, in terms of opportunity, yes, absolutely. It's an incredibly competitive industry, and there are times when you got to kind of bend over and be a team player. You just got to be like, all right, this sucks, but like if I don't play the game, I'm gonna get passed on. Someone else is gonna
Yeah.
get this opportunity. When it comes down to a micro scale, so it was a good friend of mine. His name's Thomas Shaw. He was a producer in this duo called Project 46 back in the day. He's now moved on. He's got another project called Loki. He's an amazing producer, Vancouver based. And he was, touring and doing his thing, and he'd been doing a lot of ghost production as well. And I remember telling him about one of these deals, and he said, Tyler, and I remember this, he said, when a client wants something, they want something. When it comes down to like a specific project, like that song, okay, if you've got it across the finish line and they're excited about it and they want the record, that means they want the record. At that point, they're not going to say, screw this kid, he's not playing by our means, we're going to move on. If they want that product, they know what it's worth because they knew that song was going to do 40 million streams, right? They
Mm,
can
yeah.
they could take a risk and get someone else to produce it. But if I came in and said like, hey, maybe I don't know, add that up to like maybe let's get 5 grand, let's get 10 grand instead of that $1,000. There's a good chance that they may have cooperated, right? And so he's
Yeah.
like, it's more just like when you're really trying to get opportunities to start with, be a little bit more passive and be a little bit more of a team player. But when it comes down to the specifics of a deal, that's where you need to know what your worth is and understand what value you are bringing to the table. And don't go about it being a greedy dick, but just be confident in that, like I've made something that somebody wants, and therefore I'm going to express that maybe I want a better deal for myself. Um, Having said that, I don't know. I do think back sometimes on like maybe, having a few of those deals gone better if I would have been as eager to get into an individual artist project. And I mean that like, at the end of the day, if you're making money making music, you're winning.
Yeah, it's a
Like,
good thing.
it's a good thing. And like, if some people say like, oh, I wish I was making more. Like, if you're making any money off of your music, you're already winning. You're already doing better than I'd say 95% of the people that are going into this trying to do the exact same thing. Like, it is a very, very competitive industry. Um, and with that, if I was winning and making good money, I may have not been as pushed or, eager to get into my own solo project. And so I do think that, ultimately I respect it as part of my journey. And I think that, it went the way that it was meant to go. Um, but with that, just again, like as a piece of advice to just like know what your worth is. And if you do feel like something's maybe a little bit off, have someone else look over it with you. And I think that was a big
Mm,
thing I failed to do as well, was reach out for mentorship at that time.
yeah.
And
It can be hard, especially when you're a newbie, to find that mentorship.
exactly, you don't want to come off as stupid because nobody wants to look like they don't know what they're doing. So
Yeah.
you go along with it. It's like that, it's like someone drops a word you don't understand and they say, you know what I meant, right? And you, oh yeah, yeah, you just agree with it because it's like more embarrassing to just ask them like, hey, actually, I didn't understand what you meant by that. You mind like we're expected to know everything in the universe at all times, right? And it's like just humble yourself, like don't be afraid to reach out and be like, hey, I don't understand it. I don't know if this is a good deal. Mind looking over this? And
Yeah.
then have someone be like, no, it's a terrible deal. Okay, wow, that just saved me, a couple grand. Like that. That's literally how this works. Um, so yeah, definitely that was a learning experience for me as well to just like really allow myself to be wrong sometimes and understand that maybe I'm not going to understand everything. I'm going to
Yeah.
make mistakes, and it's good to have people kind of help catch you on those mistakes.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you learned that because it does seem like you're. I mean, this is across the board for many people. Once they get more confident and they've been in the industry for a lot longer, they understand how it works and they're able to negotiate more and they just have more confidence in what they're doing. Myself included. Like, there's so many times where looking back at my experiences, I know where not necessarily where I got screwed over, but where I could have asked for more. And if you don't ask, no one. I mean, it's gonna be rare when someone's gonna be like, you know what, you deserve more. Here you go.
Yeah. I decided on my own free will to give you more money than we originally discussed.
Yeah,
Just because.
I know. Unfortunately, in this industry, people are gonna hold as much money as they can until you really fight for it. But I'm really glad that you learned that lesson, and I do think it is an important lesson that many musicians learn as they go. And the earlier you can learn it, the better. But it's also about allowing yourself to learn it the way that you're supposed to. But one thing I wanted to ask you earlier as well, the second question that I wanted to ask you after you described your influences was, now that you have your project, now that you have Fairlane and you're releasing music and you've had some very good success with it, some of the music that you have been able to collaborate on and make for yourself is very incredible.
Thank you.
One thing, I mean, you're quite welcome because it's well deserved. One thing that I find myself that's difficult to explain to other people, and I want to know what you think about it. Like I mentioned, I'm a drummer. I come from a jazz singer songwriter background, and now I'm more involved in electronic music and stuff like that because it inspires me. But I do find myself constantly having to defend a lot of my own choices amongst other musicians, and I have my own opinions in how the musician culture works. And by musician guys, I mean, straight up session guys like I was, someone who just focuses on their instrument and recording albums, and that's what they do. They jump on tours and they don't produce. It's just session guys. Um, I do find that there is this trend and there is this judgment that comes along with wanting to incorporate real instruments, analog, like we were talking about, with electronic elements. And I'm not even just talking about dance music or EDM, but across the board, like with hip hop and other genres that really use electronic music. There is this sort of judgment that you can get from other musicians when they look at what you're doing, when combining it, almost as if you are crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed. So I guess without getting too wordy, I'm wondering for you, have you ever experienced that in your circle, or have you ever felt like people look at what you're doing and they think less of you because of what you're doing? And obviously I don't, but I'm just wondering, in your opinion, do you feel like that can be a trend when someone is trying to incorporate analog elements with electronic music?
I have one particular experience that touches on that, I think, quite well. And it was feedback that I'd gotten from a friend of mine um, on a demo. This was a couple years ago, where I recorded acoustic guitars. And the thing I love the most about the sound of a guitar is the squeal it makes when you slide your fingers along the muted frets, like that,
Hmm.
right? And
That
like
sounds
that,
great. I love it.
it sounds amazing. And he listened to the song. He said, "I love everything. Can you take out the squeaking on your acoustic guitar when you're sliding your strings? That bothers me."
Hmm.
And I remember thinking, like, no, like that. But I was just like, that's what makes it. That's the beauty of the instrument and that's the beauty of any analog is the imperfection. And I think that that's something that's being missed a little bit in electronic music as of recently. I had a conversation a little while back with this guy's name's Josh Carr-Hilton. He's the founder of the EDM district here in Vancouver. Um, Super insightful guy, incredibly intelligent. And he talked about almost like deliberate imperfection in art. Um, and people's ability to remember something because of a mistake. It says if you're reading an article, it's like, let's say you read a 1,000 word article and there's a spelling mistake in that article. They used the wrong there when they should have used EIR. They used EY apostrophe RE, right? You look at it
Right.
and you go, oh my God, what an idiot. How did you make that mistake? How'd they get by? But I guarantee you're going to remember that article now because that was the article that had that little glitch, right? That was where they had a mistake. And you think back and you go, oh my God, well, now I remember that as the article that had a mistake, but I remember the context of that article. I remember everything else I read because I remembered the mistake. It was like a gateway. It was like, like a key to the lock that's like, okay, now I can remember that for the rest of my life. And he said, like, what's really cool about instruments and what's kind of been lost a little bit in electronic music is it's becoming too perfect. Everyone's
Mm.
striving for perfection, like everything is on the grid, everything is dialed in, mixed, mastered perfectly. And what made old music so fascinating was that it wasn't perfect because it was a human being that was behind that instrument. We're not designed to be perfect. We're designed to do something as close to perfect as we can achieve, but
Yeah.
we're not perfect. And that was what I found was so cool about reintroducing guitars and almost leaving these deliberately rough takes in, like having a little bit of fret buzz in there or having, like a note come in maybe a half a millisecond too early or too late. And it adds that human element back to the music. And so similar to what my friend said, like, oh, I don't like that guitar slide. Well, it's like, no, that guitar slide is what makes it sound so beautiful to me, is because it's something that shouldn't be there, that's there because that's just what the instrument is doing. And that's what my hand was doing when I was playing it, because I can't unmute the frets and open my hand completely, slide along the neck, and then close it again without having it not sound like a guitar anymore. Like, that's kind of the reason that it sounds the way that it does. And so, like, that's kind of been my response is like, well, there you can go ahead and make perfect music, but that's not what I want to do because I grew up listening to all these bands that, had these little feedback squeals and things like that in between their solos. And because, a lot of them were being recorded in their garage as well. These are smaller
Right.
acts that didn't have access to the $1 million studios.
That was part of the allure too, is that they were like DIY for the time, you
Yeah,
know?
and that was what was so cool was like they're just doing it in a garage with a couple microphones as a bunch of friends, and then if it turns into something, that's great. But it's like there was like an intimacy to that. Like you could hear that it was like a human being behind that was playing, and then you can relate to it even more. It's like, yeah, they made the song. Whereas I think that in electronic music, you get lost in that sometimes. Was like it was like a relationship between man and machine, that created
Yeah.
this record. And there's still thought behind it. There's still identification behind it, but it's like there's something that just hasn't been captured quite yet. That can even be done through running analog synthesis and hearing the manual opening and closing of a filter automation, you know, that's not going to be done the same way as you would by programming it in Ableton. And I think
Yeah.
that that's something I've been really trying to preserve in a lot of the stuff that I'm doing, especially moving forward.
Do you think that's where especially pop and electronic music is headed? Because I do feel, well, here's an interesting concept that a professor of mine told the class years ago. We were studying, what class was this? Music history, I think it was, or I don't know, like a generic overview of music history. And towards the end of the class of the semester, we just had an open discussion about what we felt about music. This professor was awesome. I forgot his name, but I love him because, you know, in this university that I went to, a lot of the professors, you know, they're all cool, but many of them were very much like scholarly professors. You know, they were like all about the classical music, jazz music, and that's all they did. And he was one of the only people that was very much like openly in love with pop music. You know, like he and all, even though he played the harpsichord, if you know what that is.
Mhm.
You know, he was a classical composer, but he was very much in love with like Michael Jackson and all these things. And so he loved, aside from teaching music history, he loved having these discussions to his students to kind of try his best to get them to open their mind about how music should be. And we had the discussion about how if you track history and you track music, there is this pattern that always repeats where music gets complex and then it gets too complex. People get tired of it and then they simplify it. And then it gets so simple that people get tired of it and it goes back. And this, you can trace this back all the way to like Gregorian chant. There's this pattern where things get complex, simplified. It happens in classical music as well. And then you can hear it in jazz, you can hear it in pop music, you can hear it everywhere. And it is fascinating to hear how, as human beings, the art form, even though it's constantly changing, there is this pattern of like people want to explore to see how far they can go with it, and then it goes too far, and then the audiences don't resonate with it. So then the composers and people that make music bring it back, and then it gets too boring. So you know, it's interesting when you track it. So what I'm getting at is with electronic music specifically, because I know that that's sort of what you fall into, even though in my opinion, your genres can cross, you can cross different genres. Do you see electronic music, in your opinion, where do you feel like it's going right now? Because I do feel like we are in a moment where we've been in love with sound design, and you know, someone like Skrillex and all those like granddads of electronic music really just showed what could be done.
Yep.
And we've experienced this for the past like decade of just constant, meticulous, amazing sound design. But I'm now seeing a trend, with you being part of it, of people really trying to bridge the gap of these imperfections, bringing in instruments, trying to figure out how to combine different things together, and not necessarily simplifying it, but moving away from the polish, I guess is the best way to say it. In your opinion, do you agree that that's what's happening? Do you feel like it's maybe something similar is happening? What do you think is happening to this genre of music, and where is it going, in your opinion?
I think it'll be done tastefully. I do see that, you know, including myself, like there is sort of like a nostalgia factor that's being applied to a lot of music that's coming out now. Drawing that early inspiration, as you said, like history repeating itself. Like you're seeing that early 2000s sort of like pop punk, you know, pop EDM, that like at the very birth of it coming back in, you know, even the way that the songwriting and the music and the arrangements are being delivered. Um, and I think that it's hard to say for electronic music as an entire genre, just because of what people are capable of doing and have been capable of doing since the beginning has allowed the entire genre to be so diversified from the very
Right.
beginning. Like you've got people that are producing the absolute shit of records, and you've got people that are making an entire banger out of like a bass guitar, a kick, and a snare. You know, and it's like, so like the simplicity and the complexity have kind of coexisted, I think, over the last decade in a way that's been, you know, absolutely beautiful. Cause then you can discover new artists. They're like, wow, they're doing it so simply. And then you discover others like, oh my God, they're so incredibly complex. I think that my opinion lies more in the live space in particular and the performance aspect of it, where I'm seeing that might be where, you know, the complexity and the overcomplication of something is being dialed back a little bit. Where you look at the typical festival set, right?
Right.
You look at what DJing used to be, and DJing used to be this like underground, sweatbox movement where people were kind of like in a rave basement, doing a bunch of ecstasy and dancing. And then you look at it now and it's like people are still doing drugs, but like you look at like the scale of these stages, these festivals, the amount of money, the pyrotechnics, like the lighting, the vision, everything. It's mind blowing how much money is going into this thing, right?
Yeah.
It was like I did a tour, um, earlier in 2020 where I brought my guitar out. It's like I'm gonna start playing guitar while I DJ and just do it like, I'll get used to it because I was scared shitless. I'm not out there playing the same way that I would in my basement, when I'm by myself, but like I'm gonna go play guitar. And you stepped out on stage with a guitar in your hand, and people were like, it was like they were seeing Jesus walk on water for the first time. Like, my God, he's got an instrument in his hand. What the hell is happening? Like completely forgetting that people have been doing this for hundreds of years. Like, it's not like I'm
Yeah.
the first person, but like they're so lost in this, like, I want to see visuals and lights and CO2 get blasted at my face. And then all that gets taken away. And then there's just someone with their instrument in their hand. And it's like, whoa, no, this is cool. This is different, but it's so simple. It's nothing, game changing. It's nothing groundbreaking. It's just me playing guitar. But like that's where I'm finding is there's that ability to strip all that away and scale it back up as time permits and as budget permits, right? But it's like for right now, it's like, how do I achieve that intimacy and how do I create that experience with somebody that shows that I'm a human being? Like I said in the record, like I'm a human being playing my instrument. I'm not some like otherworldly figure on stage that's just a silhouette behind a giant LED wall. It's like I want to
Yeah.
be a very, I want to have that intimate relationship with the crowd and do things live that are going to be unique through every single performance. And I think that's the simplicity that's getting scaled back a little bit as I'm seeing more and more people in the EDM space revert back to like the band dynamic. And they're like,
Yeah.
like a stripped band tour of my typical EDM records. And we're going to revisit this in a different way that gives people a whole new experience and a whole new, show to witness.
Yeah. And I do feel like I do think you're right. I think that that is one of the things that I loved about electronic music when I first got introduced to it, is just how complex and simple it could be. So I do feel like electronic music as a genre is so diverse that it can almost be classified as its own thing. But you're right. When it comes to the live perspective, I do feel like we have grown accustomed to the way it's supposed to look like, and then now when you introduce small little things like you mentioned, like a guitar, it's so strange. I mean, like you were saying, there are people starting to do it. There is definitely this trend where people want to bring out instruments. Actually, who were you on tour with? I'm curious at the time that you brought your guitar out for the first time.
I did it with Jana, was an electronic artist. So we played a show actually at the El Rey in Los Angeles. And then the time before that, I did it with Griffin,
Nice.
another tour. Yeah. So we did
Yeah.
that at the Shrine in Los Angeles. And then I played at the Mission Ballroom in Denver.
Both very talented artists. Shout out to you guys. But it is crazy how when you add those little elements, it can change an entire. I don't want to say perspective because it doesn't change anything in that realm. I would say, but it does add a different feeling. Like when
Yep.
you see someone playing something real on stage, there is a much different experience. That again, I personally I love electronic music and I love the DJ and everything, the lights and everything. That's awesome. But I do feel like sometimes when you change it up, you add something slightly real, it just shakes things up enough where it keeps it fresh and interesting. You know what I mean? And
I find it helps with the identification as well. Like, using Griffin as an example, actually, because he's a perfect example of someone who's upscaled that live performance, So like his entire performance is him with his guitar. He's got a keyboard and a drum pad, and he's got a live drummer, and he's got a side guitar, like a rhythm guitarist that plays some backing guitar tracks, and then he's got live vocalists that come out during his show. And when I think about an act like Griffin, I don't identify him as a DJ. He's a musician. And I
yeah,
think that that's the big thing. And it's not to say that DJs aren't musicians. It's just like that initial perspective, like that initial response to his project as a whole is like, no, he's up there with a guitar. He's not pressing play. He's not mixing records. Like he's got a set that he plays, but he's performing. And I think that there's like that different level, like a vulnerability that comes with that, but it also kind of puts you in this realm that like reminds people that, yeah, like you are also a composer, a musician, and somebody that's doing this, it's doing the damn thing. And I think that that's kind of like a really cool image that I've always wanted to achieve for myself as well. It's like, I don't want to be thought of as like, Fairlane the DJ. I want to be Fairlane the musician. Fairlane the
Yeah.
performer, right? And I think that there's a lot of people that have the opportunity to do that. It does, and it just takes like breaking through that fear of getting out and trying it for the first time. Like, I hadn't stepped on stage with an instrument since I was 11 years old when I fucked up at my first piano recital. You know, like I remember I was like, I am never getting on stage and performing in front of a human being ever again. And then fast forward, 20 years, and there I am on stage with a guitar, and I was like, holy shit, okay, or is history going to repeat itself? And then you break through that, and it was exhilarating. It was like the most like connected I've felt with a crowd. Sorry, with a crowd in my career so far. So I think that there's that opportunity for a lot of people to try that and really put themselves out there and try and shape the mold a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah. I love that. And, I do feel like, I don't know, like your story is very fascinating, and I love that you have these elements in your music that give you this uniqueness where you are becoming more of an artist than a DJ. And like we said, there's nothing wrong with that. It's awesome. People have made amazing music that way. I'm curious, do you feel like, imagine that you were someone that was revolutionary in this scene. Let's take, like, for example, like Skrillex, right? I mean, he's a granddad to a lot of things, but he's the only person I can think of right now. I don't know why. But like someone like him, would it be difficult for him to come out with a guitar one day? I mean, he was in a band back in the day, so I mean, maybe he's not the best example because he actually can play. But I mean, using the context, right? Imagine like a DJ who's been established as an electronic artist, and people have come to expect certain things from their show. In your opinion, how difficult would it be to break away from that and then transition into more of a, like we were describing, like have them come out with a guitar and stuff, and then try and become more of an artist than a DJ? Like in your opinion, in this electronic scene, is it a difficult thing to do that?
I think it's difficult to do it and not have it seem forced is the
Mm,
only thing. Because I think that if you have never identified with an instrument at all throughout your career, it might come off as a bit left field if suddenly you step on stage and you have a guitar in your hand. And I think that that might be like, okay, if you did want to go about that, maybe start showcasing through your social media, through your YouTube, whatever it is, that you are also an instrumentalist, that you play the instrument, right? And then when you do step out on stage, it's not as obscure to the eye. And I
mm,
think, or if you have already identified as someone who's constantly trying to push the boundaries of your own project, right? And I remember
right.
like, there's this video of like Marshmello, for instance, and Marshmallow's on a whole different level, but he came out and was playing guitar. And as someone who plays guitar, I know when a guitar is pre-recorded and I know when a guitar is being played live because, as I said, the instrument makes noises when you're playing it live that
Right.
cut out in post production. And he's running around on stage playing this thing, and I'm hearing it. I'm like, well, it sounds exactly like it does in the original record. There's no mistakes. You're perfectly on time. So either this guy's an actual robot or he's faking it. And at that point, it's Marshmello. He's a billionaire. Like nobody cares, right? He's doing his thing.
Yeah.
He's on top of the world, and the fans see it. If 60% of them buy into it and they love it, they've won. Okay, that's the experience. I'm talking like more for like artists that are on that like raw ticket sale, doing their first unique tours, like try to maybe plan it into a lead up story, like a narrative that allows people the time to identify with it so that it's not so left field when you do step on a stage and so that you're not met with that scrutiny of people that are going to start questioning whether you're actually doing it or not. Cause that's the worst too, is when people are like, oh, he's up there faking it. He's not even playing guitar. It's like, well, then that defeats the whole purpose of having the instrument in the first place, right? Like,
Right.
don't there is a point of it, like it's you're putting on a show and you want people to have an experience, but like definitely do it in a way that does come off as authentic, um and or surprise people. I mean, if you can rip a face melting solo and you want to go do that in front of 1,000 people for the first time, like by all means, that's a way to establish yourself. But I do think that there's like a kind of like a grace, like a way that you can kind of go into it slowly, um or plan like an entire live tour, around this, like we're doing
Right.
something different this time. Be ready to see something unique.
Yeah, I agree. Very insightful position, because I do feel like as we transition, as the music scene in general is transitioning to this desire to be more personal, I do feel like there is this opportunity for, I don't want to get too much into it because to me it's like do whatever feels right, right? But I do think you're right. I do think that being genuine will always be better than trying to fake something. And if it is part of your identity, your soul, why not? You know, why not just take that chance and do the live music stuff? I think it's perfect, and I love that you're doing this and that you are an artist that has embraced that side of you. So I'm curious, man. I know you've got some new stuff coming out as we begin to sort of tie this interview down. I do appreciate your time and you being patient with some of those technical issues that we had. Sometimes you can't avoid it, but you know what? You kept it going. So, and it's very clear you've done this before. So I love it. I absolutely love it. Talk to me a little bit about what you've got going on, man, because you've got some projects that are going to be coming out. You're kind of getting ready to release some cool stuff. So yeah, I want to hear about it, man. Let me know.
Yeah, so I've got a lot of collaborations that I'm going to keep to myself for now. That are going to be coming out.
No hints.
They're collaborations that people have wanted. So I'll hint at that. They're in the lane of something that people would want to hear. I do have a release coming out at the end of this month with Monster Cat, which cool. I think it's kind of cool because I mean, like I said, like I started in the music business with them doing radio mixes for the label, and to come back, 4 or 5 years later and be releasing as an artist was a really cool experience. So I've got that record's coming out at the end of the month. That one's with Roses and JT Roach, who was on your show as well.
JT, really shout out to you, JT.
Shout out to JT, who absolutely crushed the writing with that one with Liz. Got a record with Grant coming out later this year as well. He's a good friend of mine. We've produced some really cool shit together. Really trying to plan out this entire year. So I'd say I've got probably the first 6 or 7 months of this year already locked in.
Damn.
Which is a really good feeling. And trying to experiment. I'm really trying to kind of experiment with different genres and different sounds this year. So lots of cool stuff to look forward to there.
I love it, man. And it seems like you position yourself in the perfect place to be able to experiment and expand your musical creativity. And I think you're going to do an excellent job with it. And I cannot wait to check out some of the stuff that you've got going on. I know it's going to be great.
Thank you, man.
Tyler, thank you so much for your time, man. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, man. And I tell this to specific people, and I'm going to tell it to you. I would wish you luck, but I don't think you're going to need it. So there you go.
I appreciate that, man. This was fun. I really like doing this. So.
All right, and now, as promised, here's a brand new song titled Out Loud by Fairlane, Roses, and JT Roach.
I've been dragging my feet slowly, sitting here waiting for you. Don't seem to wanna listen even when my heart knows the truth. It doesn't matter who's to blame, to blame, to blame. The good we had has slipped away, away. Don't wanna say it out loud, 'cause then it feels real. Don't wanna carry around this thought that could kill. You're easy to talk to, so why is it so hard to break the seal? easy to talk.